Hello, and welcome to the Pit Pony Podcast with myself, Sharon Cawley,
and me, Sarah Dunwood,
in which we talk to teachers from all walks of life who exited the classroom from what they thought was a job for life and thrived on the other side of teaching. Coming up in this episode...
But it wasn't long until then black clouds were coming over me. I felt like I had no direction. I felt like I was just going through the motions. I couldn't wait to get back in my car at the end of each day. And I would literally, it was like Waterloo Road. I was out with the kids into the car. It was, because I'd sooner work at home than be there. I can't, and I must say, one thing I must say is the staff weren't, the humanities department were great. They were great. And most of the kids were great as well. It was just an unquantifiable thing, really. It's difficult to pinpoint it. Like I say, I think it's probably education as a whole, really, at that point in time.
Hello and welcome to a wonderful edition of the Pit Pony Podcast with James Terry. Now, James will tell you without a question of a doubt, he was born to teach. And with so many teachers I've spoken to, it's very rare I hear this. He knew he wanted to teach at such an early age. He did his work experience in school as a pupil to be a teacher. I mean, I love it. That is somebody who genuinely knows what they want to do from an early age. And James, as an RE teacher, went straight in at 22. Total pit pony. The bells had barely stopped ringing from university, and he was right back in as a teacher. And he talks about the first 6 years of his life as an RE teacher as wonderful, absolutely wonderful. But in year number 7, he moved schools. Sticking with the career projection he always thought he was going to be on, possibly promotion, moving in that direction that we all do. And he lasted 4 terms. And then he came out. That always leaves me with way more questions than answers. So I ask you the question now, James Terry. What do you do now?
So, hi everyone, I'm James Terry and I'm a full-time civil celebrant.
Beautiful. Beautiful, James. Cannot wait to get into how you managed to do that. And it's not an overnight fix. We're gonna weave through this journey with you. But James, can I take you back to arriving in September 2015, where you tell me you went into a new school and, in your words, it didn't feel I fitted.
So
what's all that about?
I'd started a new school in West Yorkshire. So the move was born of, although, as you just said, Sharon, I was very happy in my last school, the move was made of a promotion married in with a relocation back to my hometown. They were the two factors. So if I could have moved that school, I would have done, but obviously that wasn't possible. So I went to this new school in West Yorkshire. I was a head of RE within the humanities faculty. And it's very difficult to quantify, but from the offset, or certainly within the first term, I knew it wasn't right. The pressures were different. Now, I had come from a school down south in Hitchin, even though I'm from Huddersfield originally. And I taught Hitchin Boys School, and I came from a school where the department was quite small. It felt like a family. We had socials. We had coffee on a Friday. The staff room on a lunch and a break time was busy. And I suppose I then moved to school, and the atmosphere was a little bit different. Now, and it was a school that was working from a 3 to a 2, and I could understand some of them pressures. And one of the reasons I'm not going to name that school in podcast is because I've come to realise it's not so much the school as opposed to education on the whole. I can see that now. Although Hitchin Boys School at the time was brilliant. And I think, in a way, I trained in 2008, qualified in 2009. And in a way, those 6 years that I had to 2015, perhaps I was just living the end of what you might call the glory days, really. I'm probably just at the tail end of it, and I enjoyed that. And then things obviously changed. And they probably changed everywhere. But, of course, I was living what I was living at that point in time. So I ended up at this school. I enjoyed being head department to some degree, but I ended up in a situation where a few things happened over them terms. And 4 terms. One term, I realised I was planning all the lessons and everything else for the whole department, which is not unusual for RE. But because I only had one other specialist, I had a makeup of non-specialists teaching it, and I was sharing all my planning with them. Now, the makeup of those non-specialists was largely SLT. I felt constantly observed because I was sharing everything. I couldn't just do a lesson that perhaps fulfilled something for my class. I had to share it with everybody. And that, over time, was wearing. But perhaps the most major factor happened between the first and the start of the second year. Bear in mind, I did 1 term of a second year. They did a restructure from a humanities department where they had a head of RE, head of geography, head of history, and then an overall head of humanities. They restructured, so we had a history, a geography, and a social sciences faculty. Now, by this restructure, because I already had a TLR point, I was automatically put as second in social sciences. So here I was doing everything I'd done as a head of RE, but found myself by default, without any say, being a second of subjects I don't know: health and social care, psychology and sociology. So this took its toll as well. I think it was something that perhaps it was either that or nothing, but that's what I ended up with. And I think that was possibly one of the final things. Looking back, I just thought it's just too much for me. It's not what I signed up for not so long back. There I was, and it wasn't long really. And I would say, although I was unhappy in my first year there, I ploughed on. But it was that last term, that term 4, coming back in the September saying, come on, let's have another go at this. It's your second year. You've done it all before. You know the school. But it wasn't long until then black clouds were coming over me. I felt like I had no direction. I felt like I was just going through the motions. I couldn't wait to get back in my car at the end of each day. And I would literally, it was like Waterloo Road. I was out with the kids into the car. It was, because I'd sooner work at home than be there. I can't, and I must say, one thing I must say is the staff weren't, the humanities department were great. They were great. And most of the kids were great as well. It was just an unquantifiable thing, really. It's difficult to pinpoint it. Like I say, I think it's probably education as a whole, really, at that point in time. So there I was, and in a way, I was ill. I was definitely ill. I didn't take any time off. I was wrong. I should have looked after myself. And in hindsight, as I know, a lot of people go and get a sick note. And I didn't. And I ploughed on till the Christmas, perhaps with 2 days off. And I suppose really what my lesson for myself there, and to anyone listening, look after yourself, because I wasn't at that point in time.
Am I right in thinking you've just said, and the lesson is, didn't you have a lesson observation as well during that period of time?
Yeah, I did. When I was at Hitchin Boys School, looking back over them 6 odd years, I'd literally never had anything less than a good or an outstanding observation. Now, that's not being complacent or not being aware of being able to be any better. Like I say, perhaps it was the glory days. Perhaps we were just free to be who we were, and you could teach in a style that you wanted. Now, one thing I would say about that time, and I'll come back to the observation, is that me and my colleagues at Hitchin Boys School, we taught the same syllabus, but we could do it in our own way. You could walk into my head of department's classroom and she'd be teaching the same topic, but in her way, and I might do it my way. Once I'd arrived at my second school, it was and I've seen this load since, and I've come to it because I've been a supply teacher since, so I have seen it, that it's across schools. This is what I call uniforming it. So it's all the same PowerPoint across every classroom on that topic. Well, all of a sudden, we're all doing it exactly the same way. And that didn't work for me, essentially. So I'd been used to being quite creative and doing things my way. And perhaps sometimes, maybe I would talk for a long time. Maybe other times I wouldn't, But I came and I had my first observation at the new school. And for the first time, I was given a 3. And I have to say, whilst that, I'm not going to say that's the end of the world, but at that moment in time, my heart sunk because I hadn't experienced that level of criticism dare I say it like that, but that's how it felt. And I know they'll say that it's, requires improvement is like the old satisfactory, and therefore it's all about improving. It did feel like criticism. There's no two ways about that. And one of the things that came out was that with this school I was at, one of their criteria and observations was that they didn't like it when a teacher spoke for too long. Now, I don't think I necessarily did. I may have spoke for maybe 15 or 20 minutes of an hour's lesson, but that wasn't the criticism. The ratio was wrong. I never did quite get my head around that.
I was getting done at that time. And the expression my school used was, it was something they'd plucked out of the Ofsted criteria, or made up, because nobody ever knew what this Ofsted thing was. They said, the learning starts when the teaching stops. Mm-hmm. That became a big theme in the school I was at. The learning starts when the teaching stops. So actually, that happened to me. Mm. And I just learned to play the game. You had to have a pre-starter and a starter and group learning and student-led learning. So I just facilitated all that on the lesson observation, then carried on teaching how I normally used to teach. But when I got my first unsatisfactory whatever, it wasn't just about the criticism, it made me question absolutely everything about what I thought I was good at. And it pulls the rug. Those lesson observations, book looks, learning walks. When we talk about quality assurance, I don't think they ever have any understanding of the impact that has on a teacher. What are your thoughts on the old lesson observation point of pain, Sarah?
Well, I see it from both sides because I was SLT for a long time. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of timing, James, that 2015 was a big turning point in terms of all sorts of things. And for me as a teacher, funnily enough, I was talking about this to somebody last night, that what's happened in the last few years is the diet for children has become homogenous, standardized, uniform. So let's just take out for a second the impact on teachers. What's the diet like for kids that are going around classrooms all day, every day in this standardized way? And I used to teach. I was very much a talker, teach from the front. Some of my best teachers were talkers, and they're the ones that I remember. But I started to lose my love of it at the point where I couldn't do that creative stuff. I was known for being Miss Hebden who drew rubbish diagrams. So new year 10 kids would come into my lessons and I'd get a pen and they'd go, "Oh, we're about to have one of your sweary word diagrams." And I had to stop doing that because it didn't fit the framework of, I had to stop being creative. So I completely feel it. And it just got squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, and it's academies and it's Ofsted frameworks and it's the fear of SLT. And I sat there in that position, the fear of SLT, that if we don't do it in a particular way, we're going to get criticised and blah, blah, blah. It was just never ending in terms of where the pressures came. But you filter that down, who's impacted the most? The kids with the diet that they get.
Mm-hmm. So having listened to that and then fit that into James's timeline, which is 2015, which was Michael Gove's complete butchering of the GCSE syllabus as we know it now.
One thing I perhaps should have mentioned is that with 2015 in this school, I was teaching A-level and GCSE, but old spec and new spec. Yeah. Because it was that year of change. So I had not only all this going on, I also was facilitating the new spec with the year 10 on the new spec, the year 11 on the old spec, and being a new teacher to school. And of course, the year 11s, they weren't mine in year 10. You could go on. Very little support at that point, really.
And I think that's what's important to bring that into that timeline. So 2015, within 4 terms, you've gone from the known to this new and stark reality. And then you resign. Yeah. You hand your notice in and you resign. Mm-hmm. James, what's the aftermath to somebody like yourself who isn't just resigning from a school they're unhappy with, But talk us through the physical and emotional impact of somebody who's going, I've got this wrong about this job. It isn't what I'm not for this job. Yep. How did that impact you after your resignation?
Yeah, so, well, it did have a profound impact, but just stepping back a little bit, you know what I felt the most profound moment was actually handing that letter on the desk of the head's PA. And I just couldn't believe that I was doing that. Actually writing that letter, handing it in to the PA. And I left it as late as I could. It was October half term, essentially, the latest I could to go at the Christmas, because I toyed with every option. However, I knew that I had something on the agenda. So when the Christmas holidays came, I had a brilliant Christmas. It was just so liberating. I enjoyed it, the freedom, the thought of not having to go back. That at that point in time was epic. One thing that perhaps I should have mentioned is that there was a fantasy born during that fourth term, and the fantasy was bus driving, because I looked in my brain for anything that I could relate to look forward to. And whilst very poor pay, relatively, bus driving to me appealed to me because, well, boys with big toys perhaps, but also we had the idea that I could have a shift that had a start time and a finish time, that when I park that bus up in that depot, I'm free to go home. And that dream, that fantasy continued into the January. It was still with me. It was very much real. And in fact, my resignation letter, and I've still got it on my computer somewhere, says that I'm off to pursue a career in public transport. That's how I worded it. So off I went with this dream. Now, of course, you can't just jump in a double-decker bus and drive it. So I knew I had to train to do this. So I was going to train, and I did part my training with First Bus. And I was set to start with them, I want to say it was February or March 2017. I can't remember exactly which month. So I went on supply to bide the time. Because it's worth saying to everyone that's listening, my financial position was that I needed to work and I needed to pay them bills. I lived on my own at this point, and I had a mortgage, a relatively low mortgage, but based on being a reasonable earner. And I had that mortgage, so I had a certain amount that I needed to pay. So I signed up with supply, and I'll come back to the bus driving in a moment. But that moment, that first week, that first school week in January, and the phone just didn't ring because, of course, supply, you build relationships with your agency. And I was just a new boy on their list, so it wasn't ringing. Of course, my brain was doing one on that. I think it was by the end of the second week, sat there, in the morning, that the phone rang, and I got a day's PE at a local school. I went and did it. And I must admit, not many people always say this, but I loved being a supply teacher day to day because I could rock in, rock out. Yes, the behaviour was occasionally poor, but not my circus, for want of a better way of putting it. I just did my best on that day. I loved being a supply teacher, but the bus driving fantasy was still very much there. So off I went to First Bus. And this is where perhaps on first part there was a little bit gutting about this, but actually it's the first of two events in my journey to Celebrancy where I felt the stars aligned. This first occasion was that with First Bus, you only got 2 attempts at your practical driving test, and then you're out. But by this point, by the time they're putting you through your practical, they've done all your theory tests, which is more than your car theory, quite a bit more, and medicals and various other things like that. I'd been through all that process. And past that, but I'd failed 2 practical driving tests. So I were off, they didn't want me. At the moment in time, I remember ringing my mum, I were gutted. I were absolutely gutted. Because of fantasy, basically. But I now realise that was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Because had I have passed with First Bus, I would have had to have been in a contract for 2 years, or paid back my training fees, which were in the region of £2,000 to £3,000. So, because it was either work for us for X amount to pay your training back, if you like, or do that. So what I ended up with was walking away with 80% of my training at their cost, because that was done. So I went and did a private test for about £500 and passed third time. that allowed me to go and be a bus driver with no ties, which was absolutely amazing because I only lasted 3 months because it wasn't for me, of course. And it, as most people told me, they probably knew that already, but it wasn't for me. The late, the stupidly early, the stupidly late, and things like that, and relatively poor pay wasn't for me. So back I went to supply. And I actually remained a supply teacher for near on 6 years, and I'm still on the books now, actually, but I really don't do much. And bus driving, a local company picked me up that give me as and when Saturdays if I want to help them out. So I've kept both. And this is at this point that, along with exam marking as well, I've got a bit of a portfolio career going on at this point in time.
Oh, I like that expression, portfolio career. I do like that one. Well, I'm going to nail you down on that, because we're talking about the things that are happening on a practical basis, the supply teaching. Talk to me about your zombie period. You talked to me about, and man after my own heart, comfort eating, piling on weight, not sleeping, chest pains. Yeah. Was that in the aftermath, James, of all of this? Was that the physical recovery from the impact? Where did that fit in?
That fits in probably a bit of both, really. It certainly happened during my teaching career. And actually, even at the time, I was happy at Hitchin Boys' School. I probably was piling weight on because I was happily doing 70, 80 hours a week without thinking about it, and of course, but I was happy. That was the thing. I was happy doing it because you do when you're at that point. I was, young and eager. So I did pile weight on. I did have chest pains, which in hindsight actually started when I was Hitchin Boys. But you know what? Now I'm looking back, they started after I'd accepted the job for this new job. I'd have no real reason to know what was to come unless it was some sort of subconscious sign. But I did. And I remember going to the doctors in Hitchin and they diagnosed it as asthma, which it never was. And once I'd got into the new school and I went to the doctor up in Huddersfield as opposed to down there, saying, look, this has never rectified itself. And it was always happening at night. I was getting really tight chest at night. And it was diagnosed as anxiety. And this was not the only physical ailment triggered by anxiety. During my time at my second school, I was limping for about a week. Pseudo gout is what it was called, meaning it gave me a gout-like thing in my knee, but the word pseudo attached to it, suggesting it was a mental trigger. Well, that's the figure. So yeah, I was starting to get physical ailments based on essentially my mental health. At the time, of course, not fully realising what that meant. But in hindsight, looking back now, it was definitely anxious. I definitely wasn't looking after myself. And the zombie part was really between the build-up to making the decision to leave and actually leaving. That was a very weird time. I just felt like I was just there. I was just doing I was pretending. I was acting for the kids, but I could walk into perhaps the humanities office and someone would say, "Are you all right, James?" And I didn't realise that how outwardly that was showing. But I felt like I was just walking around like a bit of a zombie. People would, I look back now, actually, and one thing I think I said to you, Sharon, the other day, I look back now and I look at my teaching career. And from 2009 to 2015 at Hitchin Boys' School, I'm not going to say I can name every child I ever taught or anything like that, but I can put loads of faces in different groups, what we did, where we went, what school trip I arranged, all of this. And then that last 4 terms, I really don't remember many of the children that I taught, and or even necessarily what their form group number was, like 7B or something, where I can go back to Hitchin Boys and go, yeah, Paul, whatever. Oh, yes, he was in 10D. I can tell you that. And I can tell you who else his classmates were. I could even probably tell you who taught them history in year 7 when I was teaching them RE and things like that. And the worst bit, and the bit I feel a bit of guilt over, is I don't really remember much about my form group at the second school, which I do remember starting with year 7 because they tend to put new teachers school and you'd go through with them. But at Hitchin Boys, I was actually always year 7 because we tended to stick to the same year group and specialise, not across the teaching, but in the pastoral side. And I can tell you stuff about nearly every form group I had. And I can even tell you stuff about transition day and things like that. So looking back, I realised how much of a zombie my brain must have been. Because when I loved teaching, those kids have really stuck with me. When I didn't love teaching, and not that the children, it's their fault, but I haven't taken much away with me from that. And that's quite sad.
It's sad but explainable, because your body's in a threat response. Your body's in a trauma response to what's happening. And therefore, parts of your brain will have had to have shut down. I'm no psychologist, but when I've gone through these periods, and Sarah talks about them, part of your brain has to shut down. Sarah, a period of your life, you can only know for a fact you've been and done something based upon what evidence?
Photographic. If people have listened to my story, one of the earlier episodes, that there was a period of time of about 6 to 8 weeks where I talk about the fact I know I went out and walked and did X, Y, and Z because my doctor told me to, but I cannot remember, and I can remember things for my memory is very good. Sharon probably has a phrase.
Much to my detriment, because I can't get away with anything because she remember.
Correct. But that is it's like a black hole in my memory. And if it wasn't for the photographs on my phone that are time and date stamped, I'd have no idea.
I think what you just said there, Sarah, I can relate to. I think possibly I didn't quite get to quite that level, probably because the longevity of what I'm talking about, I suppose, because my reaction was to resign and go. I think had I have been at that point with children, and I've now got a daughter and a partner, but I didn't at that time. And because my mortgage was quite low and I'd sussed out that supply teaching could pay and bus driving could pay, I kind of went quite quickly. But I think if I'd have been in a different financial position and felt more trapped, if I'd have been there any longer, that's where I was going to go. So I know what I'm describing about not necessarily that class has been blurred. I think that's the start of that. I think that's where it was going to go, and I didn't.
I think that's very reflective, very sensible to look at it like that. Because I should imagine the school in Hitchin, you could tell me every classroom, what colour it was, what the room number was.
Yeah,
it's almost like a disassociation, and what you've talked about there is very, very common. And those listeners who will have done episode after episode will be picking out all of these commonalities. So, right, James Terry, at this point, you've handed in e-resignation, you're doing a bit of supply, you've decided your dream was to be a bus driver, but the one thing you found out quite early on is you can't drive a bus. That makes me laugh. You pass every single thing you need apart from driving the ruddy thing.
Yeah.
You stick at that for 3 months, and you're in and out of supply teaching on your terms. Let's, as the kids say on TikTok, let's get into it. Let's get into this wonderful, wonderful world you are in now. Before we start to talk about the celebrant, the civil celebrant, can you really capture for us what a celebrant actually is? Because I bet we all think we know, but just educate us for a little moment, will you please, teacher boy? Tell us what's a celebrant.
So a celebrant is somebody that writes and delivers services and ceremonies. I suppose the word celebrant, you see the word celebrate in there, because we are an alternative to your traditional religious minister. We are person-centred, I suppose, where perhaps a faith one, they may argue back with me on that point, but I suppose a faith-based one would have much more of a set structure as to what it might look like. Like a religious wedding or a religious funeral would have a very similar layout. So we centre on in a funeral, the deceased and their family, at a wedding, the couple. Now, most of my work is funerals. Weddings, they're lovely. I can't legally marry somebody. So we tend to attract those that want to be creative, that don't want a registrar, don't want a religious minister, are happy to go to the registry office and get legally married with just 2 witnesses and then do it whatever they want, wherever they want, and say what they want. And that's more common than you might think. When you see people, not that I've done these, just for the record, when you see people getting married down a cave or on a beach somewhere, the likelihood, if it's in the UK, is that is a celebrant, because you won't get a registrar there. So that's what it's about. But the truth is, certainly I'm only 2.5 years into this. Now, the fight back part of my journey was quite long. So when I talk about supply, I was doing supply and I loved it for near on 6 years. And it was during that time what allowed me, I suppose, the headspace to retrain, but still be able to work full time. Now, there was one second occasion I'm going to refer to where I felt the stars aligned for me. That I talked about the first time, failing the bus test, but being free from any contract. The second time it happened on this journey was in 2019, in October 2019. For a long time, I only did day to day, or a week here or a week there, 2 weeks at most if they knew someone was on a trip somewhere. I didn't do anything with any sort of commitment, just didn't have the headspace for that. But for one reason or another, my agency sort of twisted my arm to do a long-term maternity cover. I say long, I think it was a term and a half, but it was long in my mind to what I was going to do. So, and I agreed to it, to do this RE post 4 days a week. And you know what? Thank the Lord I did, because lockdowns came in 2020 and I was furloughed from the agency based on the average of the earnings prior to it. So what I'd ended up with is being absolutely furloughed from the agency because the school didn't need me, and I'd got to what they call, and those of you out there on supply will know the term AWR, I'd gone on to parity pay. So essentially I was earning supply money. Sorry, I was being a supply teacher on similar pay to what I'd been doing as a perm teacher, except for I still told the school I didn't mark after an X amount of time and I want the planning in a folder. And they obliged because they really needed me. So that really worked for me. So again, on this journey, it's been quite slow. There's been a lot of no man land. I think that's fair to say. I've been in these areas where perhaps celebrancy wasn't on the agenda really in 2019 even. Bear in mind, I'd left permanent teaching end of 2016. There was quite a time when I was just portfolio career, doing my own thing, earning enough. The seed had been planted. Now when I look back in 2011, we go right back, and I'd seen a humanist do my grandfather's funeral. And he was really good. And although whilst I'm not a humanist, because I don't belong to the humanist society, I'm a civil, I'm an independent, the thought it wasn't a religious minister. And I remember thinking, I could do that. But I was so happy teaching boys' school that never really occurred again. But the lockdowns gave me headspace. And I think by the time we'd arrived at the other side of those lockdowns, and I'd done a couple of the maternity covers, because what had happened, I'd evolved at this school. I'd taken on that semi-long-term thing to do, gone into these lockdowns, school didn't need me, I was furloughed, and then they wanted me back after. And at this point with COVID, I was like, well, I may as well go to one place of work and I may as well know where I stand. So I did. And really for about 2 years on a supply, 4 days a week, I was at this school. It was almost like being a permanent teacher as far as the kids were concerned, except for I knew that I drew the line,
And I think that psychologically you need, I think the scarring of those 4 terms. Yeah. I'll do it. It's like being in a relationship all by name. You were in that contract, but you could not psychologically feel trapped within teaching again.
No. I would have sooner have done it. I did through the agency, despite the school. By the time I'd been there a little time, there were mutings of, would you go on a temporary contract with us? Even down to, I think at one point, it never happened because I never applied, but would you come and work for us permanently for post? What would you apply? No way. Wasn't going there. It was complimentary, and I got on with the staff, and I took it as a compliment that perhaps I still had it. Perhaps I am a good teacher still, but I just wasn't interested in it. And I suppose where I'm going with this, going back to the Celebrant thing, was I got to a point where I needed more. How do I quantify that? I was earning reasonable money as a supply teacher. I had the freedom, I had the headspace. But was I truly fulfilled? And it probably took 6 years to get to the point where I felt I needed that something else. And I just had to think about it. I couldn't afford just to take time out and retrain. I couldn't go back to university. I couldn't, I'm a useless DIYer, so there was no chance going to be a tradesman. And And we all know they earn good money, but that wasn't going to happen. So,
and we all know you can't drive a bus.
Yeah, well, I can actually, but I can't. It just took a while to prove it. So there's a few stories of that as well, but we'll leave that for another day. One including a cyclist, but he was fine. He was fine.
And if he's listening, we send much love to his family.
He got up. Anyway, so well, I needed something more, and Celebrant I went back to, and I realised you could trade online. I'll come to the different types of training in a minute, because I think that's really good advice for people, and I'll just come back to that. Sideline that for a moment. I trained and got a reputable qualification, but I did it online, which allowed me to do it when I wanted, because they were like pre-recorded videos and stuff, and I could do it in an evening, a weekend, and on my day off, because I didn't work 1 day a week. And I did that. And a lot of training companies do have you on a residential for a week. There's no way I could have done that financially. And by this point, my little daughter was on the way and things like that. So I did the slow burn. And I actually got the full training and qualification out of the way before I even put myself out there. So really, by the time I'm actually being an active celebrant, looking for that first job, if you like, because one thing that is true of all of my jobs here, as a bus driver now, I'm working casually for a local company. I'm a supply teacher, and I've been marking exams for AQA as well. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but I was. I'm entirely in the gig economy here, and the celebrancy is no different. So this portfolio career was building, and I thought the celebrancy would just be part of that gig economy, in the sense that I would have a week where 1 week I might do 2 funerals, 2 days supply, and bus drive on a Saturday. That, at the time, we were like, oh, that's a dream. Look at that. But for whatever reason, and I'm not one for blowing my own trumpet, I took off like no tomorrow in my celebrancy. Now, that's not necessarily true of everyone, and therefore, as I said to Sharon the other day, I won't be sat here upselling celebrancy in any sort of fake way, because the realistic nature of it is really hard to crack. I had a massive dollop of luck, and where that luck came from, I'll never know. But I got going quite quickly, so I did my first service in May 2022. I did 1 funeral that month. I did 3 in the June 2022. I did 8 in the July 2022. And then I fluctuated a little bit. And then December 2022 arrived, winter. And, you don't have to be a mad scientist to realise that the death rates are higher in winter. And it was the first time perhaps the demand was there. My reputation had been built with a few funeral directors. And I did 13 funerals that month. And let's put it this way, since January 2023 through to now, into the back end of 2024, I've never done less than 14 a month. So I'm truly full-time. And as to how that happened, very hard to quantify. It's very hard for me to give top tips on it. But I love it. I get a lot from it. And I am, in many ways, after an 8-year journey, both mentally, in the sense of rewards, and also financial earnings, pretty much where I would have been as a UPS teacher plus TLR point. So I've kind of arrived, but no way was that a quick journey. We're talking to today, this Christmas coming, Christmas 2024, that's your 8th anniversary from leaving the classroom. And it's been a journey. It really been a journey. And but I wouldn't change any of it, because I talk about no man's land, but I love supply teaching. I didn't mind a bit of bus driving. In many ways, it allowed me to heal, I think. And now I'm able to give my all, because here I am again doing 70 or 80 hours a week sometimes. And yes, do you know what? My weight's creeping back on and various other things. And there are points when I'm stressed, but I love it. I absolutely love it.
Oh, I've just been captivated from start to finish, to be honest. And Sarah has just she's just resting her face on her hand. She's just listening and milking and drinking you in, because I know why you're successful at what you're doing. I can read your energy. I can feel you, of course. It's just all there. I've no words, and it's very rare I've no words. You are exactly what your service provision is all about. It just oozes from you. I should imagine you had to almost take this joy that you have of being a celebrant and then package some business skills around it, because you had a dollop of luck. I should imagine you've had to, because I've looked at your social media. It's beautiful. It's absolutely spot on. And me putting my business hat on as a marketeer, you've nailed what your presence is like online. Did you do that as part of a course, or did that come naturally to you?
Truth be told, I don't think my training to be a celebrant was the best always available. My mentor was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But because it was online, and there are lots of courses out there that are brilliant, probably a lot of what I've done has been common sense, experience. I don't think that they gave me a good backbone, don't get me wrong, but a lot of that I've just sort of felt my way through. And it does work. I'm not going to say loads of businesses come through social media, but the presence is there if families want to find you. Sometimes they like to come and find you afterwards just to sort of put a comment or something on there. But a lot of this work in celebrancy is without a doubt relationship-based, because unless you are a wedding celebrant by the most part, which I'm not, I've only done a couple, I'm mainly funerals, just because that's the way it's fallen, and perhaps where I sort of laid myself in the market. That's not to say that I turn weddings away by no stretch. It's just they're not. You don't find me at loads of wedding fairs and spending loads of expenditure on that. I don't. It's all bound to relationships with funeral directors, a lot of it. And you can direct market to your community if you'd like to. And I do to some degree do that through social media. I have signage on my car, magnetic signage that you can take on and off and things like that. But the bulk of what I do is because I have built a relationship, I've been given a go, and then, as with all lines of work, repeat bookings, because that's how it works. So, I always say to any new celebrant that's coming in, I say, really, you can't say that you are established with a funeral director until you start getting into, dare I say, 20 or 30 funerals with them, because then you really are. Because they'll give people a go, and there are some where I've done one or two with and never heard from again. Realistically, I've had both sides. It's all been part of a journey. But now I've got a core that use me all the time. I've got some that I think of a bit like salt and pepper, use me occasionally, and I'm at the point now. Like I say, I average about 19 and a half funerals a month. I think it works out if you do the maths on it. And since starting funerals alone, I've taken over 480 bookings since May 2022. And it's beyond my wildest dreams, really, because like I said, if you'd have asked me 2.5 years ago, or back in May 2022, when I was doing that first funeral, I'd have said, I could do a couple of, if you could get to the point where I do 2 or 3 a month, and I'll do some supply teaching, or I think even better if I'm doing 2 a week and 2 days supply teaching. And to me, that was like the ideal. But now I look back and think, wow, here I am. This is full-time celebrancy. And yet I don't quite let go of the buses and the supply, because I do like keeping my hand in. But I've done 2 or 3 days supply teaching in 2024. But I'm happy to do that, just to keep my hand in.
Can I just go to something, which is impact? Because I've lost my stepfather this year, which was hard. And that happened in Spain, and we didn't have a funeral. The rules are very different over there. So he was cremated within 48 hours. Our decision not to have a service. But I just go to, I've been to a humanist service. I've been to things like that. And I just think the impact that you have had on over 400 families and their communities, in terms of the way, I know just by talking and listening to you, I've been utterly transfixed. The way you must deliver a final funeral for somebody, the ripple effect that you must have had on families. And if we correlate that to what we want as teachers, which is to know that we've had an impact on children and their families, I think you've almost kind of come full circle, but gone into a different circle.
I've found that same feeling. I've found that same sense of belonging and a sense of it's difficult to quantify, actually, Sarah, because going back to what we were saying earlier, it's sometimes that what I didn't have in supply bus driving exam marking is, for want of, there's no way of wording it really, but something more. So self-fulfilment, that has come back through. And yes, I'd like to think I have had a big impact on these families. I have now got returning families. I've families that I've done 2 or 3 for. It's only 2.5 years, but sometimes if you've done mum, you get dad. You know, if they're of a certain generation or a certain age. I've had a whole wide range of things, and when you start off in this business, you do start perhaps with funeral directors trusting you with, you know, a handful of, trying to put this in the politest way possible, maybe your older generation, you sort of you know, perhaps the sort of most common funeral, more expected.
Yeah.
You know, 90-year-old lady being in a care home, that kind of scenario. There's not that they're equally important, but when you go on and you build this reputation and you show what you're worth and what you can do and the difference you can make, I'm getting a higher proportion now of what I call tragic ones. You know, people have taken their own lives, people have died young of cancer, sometimes very difficult ones, like I've done, and I don't mind sharing on here because we're not naming names, but I've been asked to do a sex offenders where there's nobody present, but they still need a dignified send-off, and you end up with just a social worker and possibly a solicitor sat there. And it evolves, and you get these real challenges as you go along. Only a couple of weeks ago, without going into details, I think a lot of people will have seen a tragic one in the news about a mum and 3 children in a house fire, and I took that funeral, and that was one of the most hardest ones I've ever done. And I came away from that, and I sat in my car, and I took the deepest breath and went, how on earth have you done that? But I did. And that, you know, and you a bit like with teaching, there are bits of teaching where, you know, when you get told a horrible safeguarding story or something like that, and it really, really takes you on a personal level. Well, some of these funerals do that. I mean, you take something from them all, you do, but there's different levels of acceptance with it. And even though there you are performing, in a way, you are voice of that family, and you have written something that is a tribute, that is respectful, and you are holding that together, there are some that just really can just break you.
Yeah. I'm just so, I can't even begin to describe to you what I know that Sharon is feeling and I am, but to listen to you talk with such compassion and care about something which for most is the most difficult point in people's lives. I'm in awe of you. Genuinely.
I don't take any of it for granted, because I love this job, and a lot of people ask you, and it's a question that's asked almost daily, certainly weekly. Oh, how do you? I can do that. How do you do that? You know, and I think the truth is, it's distance, because they're not my relatives, and I think there has to be a bit of that, because while some celebrants will say, I can do my mum's funeral, or I spoke at my auntie's, or whatever, I don't think I could. And there's nothing wrong with that. People are different. And so for me, I know that the reason I can do this on a daily basis, it's all about that sort of care and compassion, but enough distance to be able to hold it together. Now, the one I've just mentioned is a whole different scenario. That luckily, well, they're not even a 5-yearly occurrence. You know, the bulk of what I do is, you know, one person hopefully has had a great life on the whole, and it is a celebration of their life. And the bulk of it is that. I think that's fair to say. But you will get these little ones where you really are tested emotionally, physically, and actually just as a wordsmith. You know, where do I start with that pen on that paper?
Wow. I'm going to take you back to that boy who knew what he wanted to do when he was at school. And I'm going to take a job title out of it. He thought he wanted to be a teacher. Actually, what he wanted to do was impact people's lives. He wanted to be compassionate and he wanted to make a difference. And I know that's an overused expression, but you just got the job title wrong, pal. That's all. Because what you have outlined is, if I have ever spent time in somebody's company who has had a purpose and a vocation, it is you, my friend. And I am thoroughly humbled to have spent time with you today. Really, really humbled and in the true sense of the word, in awe. And it now brings me to the point where I ask you, with this whole quest and journey that you've been on, tell us about a sliding doors moment in James Terry's life. Tell us about a moment in your life, James, please, that would not have happened had you not have gone into that PA's room and put that resignation on her desk.
It's difficult to put one, but perhaps the main one happened just last weekend when I was runner-up in a national award at the Association of Independent Celebrants, and I was runner-up in Outstanding Funeral Celebrant category. Now, I had, in all fairness, put my name out there on social media and stuff to gain some nominations, because if you didn't, nobody would know it was happening. But I thought I'd get a few nice words, and then I ended up as a finalist, top 5, and I thought, wow, that's way beyond what you've ever dreamt of. I mean, for one, it gave me a nice little logo I could put on my emails and stuff like that. But wow, finalist, you know. And I sat there, and I sat in this awards dinner, and there was representatives from different organisations and professional bodies, particularly from the funeral industry, like funeral directors, professional bodies and things like that, with their chains, the presidents with their chains around their necks and things like that. And first off, there's a media company that run all the music and things in crematoriums called Obitus. And they did a little draw where you had to write down an idea for a new theme to be projected on the slides and things in crematoriums. And you won a £50 Amazon voucher. Well, first off, I put motorsport. Well, I got pulled out. So I won the £50 Amazon voucher. So I'm sat there thinking, oh, okay, that's enough for tonight. And then they did a raffle. And my name got pulled out, and I got a bottle of whiskey. I thought, oh, God, this is like, I don't even play the lottery here. I don't know what's happening. And then, of course, we went through, and they'd got onto the awards, and they went through. First off, there was 3 categories. One was for wedding and family celebrant. Then it was the outstanding funeral celebrant. And then eventually it was one about contribution to celebrancy, which is like an overall, I suppose that's like the pinnacle one. You know, there's no way I was in that category because I've not been doing it long enough. So they did the wedding one, runner-up, well-deserved, winner, well-deserved. Then we got on to the outstanding one, and they read, what they were doing for each one was reading a quote of something somebody had said as a nomination, and they read that one. Of course, I'm thinking, be anybody really, you know, that's doing this, that cares, and is good at it. And then they said, you know, runner-up in the outstanding funeral category, outstanding celebrant, funeral celebrant, James Terry. Well, there I was up for a 3rd time, but this one, I couldn't believe it, because I never in a million years thought I'd ever win, let alone be a finalist, let alone win. So actually to become runner-up, 2nd place, and to an amazing woman called Kate Moran, who runs her own chapel and does amazing work with children's hospices. I was absolutely flabbergasted, wow. You know. So that was a sense of, it was a mixture really of, in that moment, and the way I worded it to my family and friends, and I think on a Facebook post on my personal and professional page, it was like a mixture of pride, achievement, and imposter syndrome all in one moment. Because how was this me? You know, yes, okay, it was all within our own circle. It's not like a nationally recognised, not everyone's going to know what that meant. But for me, I was like, I can simply say I'm the 2nd runner-up in an outstanding funeral celebrant award.
Yes, you can.
2.5 years in, here I am. And I thought, I'll take that any day of the week.
I cannot wait to see where the next epoch of your journey takes you. And I just want to say the fact the imposter syndrome kicked in just says so much more about you and how humble you are. And what an amazing time we've spent in your company, James. So on behalf of Sarah, myself and the listeners, I just want to say, James Terry, thank you for a memorable Pit Pony episode.
It's been an absolute honour, and thank you for asking me, because if I'm honest, yes, family and friends know parts of my story, but I think it's the first time in those 8 years I've been actually asked to share your story, James. First time.
And it's been an honour to offer that listening ear. Thanks ever so much, James.
Loved it. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
I feel like we should sit in silence for about a minute to just let that sink in.
It's not often I would use the word compelling, but I was utterly transfixed and really quite emotional about what he's ended up doing. I don't have words.
I think for me, because we stayed on with him, didn't we, for about 10 minutes afterwards, and this sums the guy up, in my opinion. It's like, first of all, do you think that was okay? Yeah, I think that speaks volumes. And then he was at great pains to say, look, I hope I've not missold anything here, that going into the world of celebrancy is easy. There are so many rogue training courses out there. I don't want people to think it's like a sedan chair being carried into this industry. He even wanted to clarify that it's so important to do your research, because there are so many people out there who prey on the vulnerable. And he said it wasn't cheap to do the training course. It was between £2,000 and £3,000, was it? He had to pay.
Yeah. It was a reasonable investment, and I think that goes to a question that's asked in different contexts about different types of courses. Is buyer beware, very much so, and if it feels too good to be true in terms of it being low cost, it probably is too good to be true.
And the over-promising, you know what we do within our business structure, we err on the side of caution more often than with regard to success rates in startup businesses. And I think that's what he was saying. If you're involved in a trainer who's reassuring you that you are going to have a booming business, that you're going to be doing that, he just said, enter into it with caution. So I think it was right for us to honour James's caution there and bring that to the fore of our epilogue. But oh my word, what a guy. What a story. He'd have been my favourite teacher, my favourite bus driver, my favourite seller. He would have just been all the favourites, to be perfectly honest, because he was just a really, really decent person who'd gone through a series of life experiences and maintained his humility, his compassion, his humour.
So grounded.
Yeah.
So grounded. And I think where we came to in terms of actually what he thought he wanted to do, and I have no doubt, had the circumstances been different, he would have been a lifer in terms of teaching. And he would have been one of those great teachers that you and I recognise from our own childhoods and all the rest of it. But I think to get to the point of it was just a different job title, James. You're having the impact, you're doing what you wanted to do, just in a different place. And I think that's magic.
I think what was interesting for me, grounded, he's sorted himself out and everything. But the one time I saw him change and met with resistance from him and saw a vulnerability was the thought of being contracted back into a school. There was some damage done to that fella there, because it was on his terms. Yes, he touched lucky over lockdown and being furloughed and whatever was going on there. But his absolute hard no was, I am not putting myself back into an environment, locking myself in again. Now that tells you something with somebody who only experienced something for 4 terms. It must have impacted him massively.
Yeah, and I think trauma comes can happen quickly, can't it? It doesn't have to happen over a protracted period of time. And if you think back 3 years ago, even before I was formally contracted into Connexus, I'd said that I was unemployable because I was a hard no in terms of ever being formally employed again, because I was fearful of being contracted in whatever situation. So yeah, I get that. Completely get that.
We always equate it to going back into a relationship after a horrific divorce. You know, I'm not doing that because it's been too scarring what's happened. But I could have, when I've connected with him previously, and he went, I can tell a good story, Sharon, and you can just see how that comes through when he talked about putting pen to paper and being a wordsmith and capturing the most precious exit of somebody's existence. You just know that he's so gifted and he's born to that. And I hope that people listen to his story, and because he was so humble and because he's not talked about how it was easy, they could do that. They could easily do that.
I think it's important to note as well that not only did he talk about with us afterwards about the training courses and all the rest of it, that he made a very generous offer that if anybody wanted to follow up with him, that they could get in touch. So James's links will be on the episode notes as well. So he's a great guy, very, very supportive of other people, and if it is something that's of interest to people, then I would encourage you to reach out to him, because he will give you his time willingly.
Oh, and just imagine, right, if he ends up doing that, you know, that third category of the award, outstanding contribution to the wider world of it, let's get him in that first category.
Oh, and you know, where I thought you were going was maybe he could be the celebrant for the first life after teaching wedding.
Well, there is that. I've got something slightly different in mind. But what an amazing episode that has all left us a little bit reflective and comforted that there are still great people out there who can make a difference, even if it is in a life outside of teaching. Thanks again, my friend. Okie dokie. I'll see you on the other side.
See you later.
Thank you, as always, for listening to our Pit Pony podcast. On behalf of Sarah, our guests, and all involved with the production, we're so grateful for your support. Please subscribe to our channels, follow us on social media, and we look forward to seeing you next time when we will have another inspirational story from a fellow Pit Pony who has exited the classroom and thrived.